I'm recording.
Okay, great. Okay, so I just want to say a few words before Jason gets started with his presentation. I am Dan Berglund, the president and CEO of SSTI. We are working with RTI, the Research Triangle Institute, on the Build Back Better Regional Challenge Community of Practice, supported by EDA. I'm going to say what Jason will reiterate here in probably a minute. We want to stress that this presentation is based on SSTI's understanding of the statute, our communications with people on the Hill. This does not represent guidance from the Economic Development Administration. So this is purely based on information that we've developed on our own. With that, let me turn it over to SSTI Vice President Jason Rittenberg, who, if he hasn't completely introduced himself at this point, in addition to running the TBED community of practice, he's also our point person on the Innovation Advocacy Council and trying to keep track of everything that is occurring in DC. So, Jason, let me turn it back over to you. We are recording this at this point. We'll record through Jason's presentation. When we get to Q&A, we'll stop the recording so that if you want to ask questions and not have them immortalized, you're able to do that. So, Jason.
Great, thank you. Appreciate the introduction. I don't have anything else to add to that. Speaking of the tracking information of what's going on, though, do have some slides at the end with new announcements that have come up from EDA in the past 24 hours, essentially that they are ready to begin formally collecting input on the program. But before we get there, we do want to walk through what's in the statute. Again, as Dan said, this is our read of the legislation. And as I was saying earlier, please feel free to use the chat to start throwing in questions that you have about the program or things that you would like me to clarify as we go along. So, quick background on regional tech and innovation hubs. Where did this come from? It's something that Congress has been considering for a while as a new program that could be at the Department of Commerce in general and likely EDA specifically. So it was first proposed even before the Build Back Better Regional Challenge as part of the Endless Frontier Act. That was legislation that was initially co-sponsored by Senator Schumer and Young. It was then authorized last summer as part of the CHIPS and Science Act. And then in the omnibus budget bill that went through in December of last year, it was appropriated $500 million. So pretty substantial first investment, although as we'll talk about, that's really just a fraction of the $10 billion total authorization level that this program could have. Quick note here, we maybe can discuss more in the Q&A what this kind of means, but in terms of when EDA might be spending this money, $41 million of the 500 that was appropriated last year is in FY23 money. Technically, EDA doesn't have to use that by the end of the fiscal year, but they do probably want to use that money sooner rather than later to make sure it wouldn't be rescinded in a future appropriations bill. The remaining $459 million was appropriated until EDA expends it. Again, always a chance that Congress could come in and rescind that money, but they did provide that with the intention that it would be a longer term or available to EDA over a longer term, perhaps, than the 41 million. Kind of a weird wrinkle in the appropriations process there, but again, at least there's some urgency for EDA to get out a portion of the money in the near future. So what is Tech Hubs trying to achieve? Well, there's kind of a long section in the bill defining a number of goals, but essentially what it boils down to is that the regional tech and innovation hubs, and by the way, I'm just going to call it Tech Hubs from here on out. That's also the name that EDA is going with on the short handle. is to support the development and implementation of regional innovation strategies that will enable U.S. leadership in critical tech and innovation sectors and promote benefits for all Americans and regions. Some of the other details that get discussed add more emphasis on this idea of having an intersection between critical technologies and key national challenges. I'll actually explain those a bit more in a moment, talking about some of the specific benefits, so jobs, wages, new technologies that would be developed, and talking more specifically about what types of Americans and regions are being specifically included. But essentially, this is what the purpose of the program boils down to. Overall, the CHIPS and Science Act identifies 5 core national challenges and a list of 10 initial key technologies that are relevant to American national security and other needs. And these apply to several programs created in the CHIPS and Science Bill, including a lot of the activities that the NSF Technology and Innovation Partnerships Directorate needs to cover. And they apply kind of by reference to EDA. It's not clear exactly that EDA necessarily is limited only to this list because the language is somewhat flexible, but there are a couple different points of the statute that reference back to this list essentially for EDA to consider. Certainly, you'll see items on this list that line up well with other priorities of the Biden administration. And also that these lists are relatively broad. So it wouldn't be surprising to see Commerce go ahead and embrace the emphasis from these lists, perhaps. So national challenges, security, productivity, especially in the manufacturing sector, workforce development, climate change, and the idea of equitable access to opportunity. Critical tech, again, this list is somewhat broad, but you've got AI, machine learning, high performance computing, semiconductors, quantum information, robotics. I mean, you can see the whole list there. It covers a lot of areas that are kind of emerging sectors, certainly likely to be critical for the economy moving forward. At a high level, there are really 3 programmatic elements of the Tech Hubs program. They're nested, they're interrelated, so it gets kind of complicated to clearly disentangle them at all times, but there are some elements of each that are unique. So it's helpful to understand this as you're going through the statute and trying to figure out where the funding is going to come from and what you want to have ready in order to be competitive. So the first part is a designation of the technology hub. Designated hubs are then eligible to compete for implementation grants. That's where the majority of the funding is. The hubs designation, as I kind of put into the slide, does not necessarily entail any funding, but hubs can then compete for what is almost a $10 billion authorization level. So very substantial funding that's envisioned there. The strategy grants, while they are related to the Tech Hubs program, they're authorized within the Tech Hubs program. Strategy grants are available to regions that are hubs or are not hubs. And so that's why they're on the outside there. And Congress authorized a total of $50 million for the strategy grants. And yes, definitely, as popped up here in the chat suggested, there are some echoes of at least the initial stages of the Investing in Manufacturing Communities partnership here, if you're familiar with that, because you have that idea that you've designated a region. However, this time there is the follow-up that there's implementation money included in the program. So there are a lot of factors that the Secretary of Commerce is directed in the statute to consider in awarding a hub, and also then in making the awards and the implementation awards. I've put it under the hub designation section here, but these same factors are what guides the Secretary for both the hub designation and the implementation grant awards. So we will be providing these slides to people. We can talk about this more in the Q&A. Don't know if it's necessarily helpful to just read this list back to people, but do want to flag that unlike some other regional economic development programs that has been run in the past, and unlike maybe some comments that have been published about what this program could look like, I do want to flag for people that the idea of having advanced research, development, manufacturing, leveraging federal research centers, those are considered critical aspects that the Secretary should be considering in making the award, at least according to the statute. Partnerships with groups like venture development organizations, CDFIs, minority depository institutions are also required here. So some different elements, kind of different wrinkles that you see. Engagement with the private sector is supposed to be something that should be strongly considered, as well as providing support back to local businesses. And engagement with education, really trying to align workforce activities so that there's both activity that's going to involve the education sector and lead to development of new workforce and skills. But then also there's some discussion in the statute of seeing that over the longer term, there's going to be kind of even K through 12 impacts and higher ed impacts as well, where there's kind of planning for how they can be integrated into the overall workforce needs within this new tech sector that you're focused on. So, key question that I'm sure people want to get into: how many hubs are we actually talking about here, and where are those hubs going to be? So the statute defines a minimum of 20 hubs that need to be identified through this process. There would be 3 per EDA region. There are 6 regions, so that gets you to 18 of them. Within those 18, there are 3 provisions for different types of low population regions. Trying to group things in a way that's cohesive. There's this language here is a little weird. So if this needs clarified, totally fair, and let me know if there are questions. But when we're talking about those 18, at least a third need to include what the statute calls a small and rural community. Now, small and rural, I want to flag, does not mean rural necessarily in a USDA sense. Whoops, sorry about that. I was trying to double check my notes there. Didn't mean to move the slides. The definition of a small and rural community means a non-core area, a micropolitan area, or a metro that's less than 250,000 people. So we're still talking way bigger than USDA standards here. Just a smaller urban area essentially is eligible. A third needs to include an F-score state, and at least one of the 18 awards needs to include a low population state. That is a state that does not have an MSA that's larger than 250,000 people. Only a handful of states qualify under that provision. So EDA doesn't necessarily have to look at these and doing like one of each within its 6, because overlap is specifically allowed. So so a small and rural community might be in an F-score state, and then that one counts double. So we'll need to see if there's some specific guidance for how Commerce decides to deal with this. But these are the provisions, again, that are specifically in the statute. So outside of the 18 that are 6 per EDA region, there are 2 more that may have a focus on underserved communities. That's kind of at the Secretary's discretion. And then within the hub designated section, instead of being something that's specifically directed within the selection criteria, they are also encouraged to designate hubs in areas that have participation from minority serving institutions and in regions that either currently rely on or have recently relied on fossil fuels. Question about states, including commonwealths and territories. So I will go back and double check this, but I believe that I have this on the eligible participants side. I'm not sure about the territories or regions here. But certainly in terms of what groups are eligible, it includes territories and it includes tribal governments as well. So just so you can see EDA regions, this is where they line up. You can find that on EDA's site under the contact section. And then NSF EPSCoR states as well. We have that in there for everyone to reference. So when it comes to the implementation awards that the hubs are allowed to receive, what are you actually allowed to do? Well, there are a lot of things that are defined in the statute, provided a high level overview here. In general, activities fall into 4 buckets. So as you can see, there's workforce development, there's business and entrepreneur development, technology development and maturation, and then infrastructure, although it's important to note that the infrastructure pieces have to be related back to the region's ability to provide services in the workforce, business, or tech development areas. So it's not just infrastructure for the sake of infrastructure. To get a little bit more specific, while again, there's a broad list of things that you can do, some specific callouts on the workforce development side, including building partnerships that are going to provide the training, the education, the recruitment of people, educational content in terms of curriculum, as well as programs to train people, support services that wrap around the actual skills training, and then outreach to engage more people, and also to connect with industry about what their needs are. On the business and entrepreneur development side, this can include services related to growing or launching a business. And it can also include facilitating a support network that you need to have to make sure that there's good alignment among the groups that are providing services to companies. Tech development and maturation can include activities that will develop technology, that will help deploy technology out to other companies, support for technology transfer. And then there's also language in there that the funds can be used to provide or ensure access to capital. And so interesting in particular, I think, to see if Commerce leans into the ability to use the funds to actually provide access to capital. That's something that EDA is commonly restricted, but does seem to possibly be explicitly authorized here. So the implementation of the, yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt. If you can just take a look at chat and look at the last question that was posed. I think it's a good one tied with this slide.
Yeah. So will they be looking for hubs that do all of these things or just one? And would it harm an application if they do more than one? So my impression of the overall program is that Commerce is being strongly encouraged by the statute to consider an approach that is going to try to be doing multiple things. The idea here is that you're really going to be trying to take a region from being just competitive to really being a leader within this tech sector. And so my understanding of Congress's intention here is that they are looking for a really robust approach that's going to be touching on multiple areas at once. If we go back to the designation factors, you'll see that the Secretary is encouraged to consider the use of R&D, economic impact, development of a skilled workforce, engagement with private sector, supporting local businesses. So I think it's fair to say that you would probably need to be proposing to be doing all of these things in order to be competitive, not just one of those areas. Again, we'll have to see what the actual rules are from EDA. This is our reading of the statute, but that would be my expectation.
And I just want to emphasize too that the way the question was originally written was, are you looking for hubs on this? And so just want to reiterate, all SSTI, all we are doing today is providing background information. We don't get to pick the hubs. We don't get to design the program. So just want to underscore that this is based on our understanding of the statute. Go ahead, Jason.
Good. And Julie, I see your question about this in engines, and that's a great question, but one I'll save for the Q&A period at the end here. So some structural details of what the implementation awards actually look like. So as a reminder, again, this is authorized at nearly $10 billion, roughly $3 billion for FY23 and 24, and then $7 billion for the latter 3 years. So program is authorized for 5 years. A really important note is that the awards go to a consortia. So this isn't just, we'll see how Commerce decides to operationalize this, but at least as spelled out in the statute, this isn't just a lead organization or an organization that has some partners in the background, perhaps. It really does seem to describe that the awards are actually going to a consortia at once. Again, you have to be a hub. Again, the selection criteria, as I mentioned, for the implementation awards was the same as for the actual hub designation. There's an interesting wrinkle here that the implementation awards are divided into an initial performance period. You must prove success toward the program metrics before you can receive a subsequent award. So to break down what the initial performance period looks like, the time needs to be at least 2 years. Given that it's a 5-year authorization, that we'll see how many groups can even begin work in this first year. I would purely speculate that 2 years might be where that number is set for the initial period. That amount has a cap of 150 million that can be given out on that initial period. And then the federal share of the award is 90%. On the subsequent performance period, the period of time can be as deemed appropriate by the secretary. There is no dollar value cap. However, no one hub can receive more than 10% of the total amount of funds provided for implementation awards. And then the federal share is 75%. Now, I have an asterisk there on the federal share for 2 reasons. One, there's exceptions in that federal share rate. So tribal governments in both categories are allowed to receive up to 100% of the federal share instead of needing to come up with a 10 or 25% match. And then small and rural communities can be at 90% instead of needing to go down to 75 for the subsequent period. Also, again, we'll see how Commerce decides to operationalize this, but this is not quite the same as a match rate. The definition in the statute is that this needs to be the federal share of the, quote, total operating costs of the Regional Technology and Innovation Hub in each year. And so there's some potential for EDA to interpret that differently than a true federal match, where those funds would have to be specifically dedicated in advance to the project. It could possibly be expanded a bit beyond that and looking at the overall operations that are directly related to the hub. And yes, to this clarification question, in order to receive funding for an implementation award, you do have to be a hub. You can receive the strategy funding if you're not a hub, but the planning funding, but you have to be a hub to get the implementation funding. All right, so I've mentioned the strategy grants a couple of times. What can you do with those? Well, the strategy grants can go toward coordinating a planning process. It can go to identifying potential regional partnerships. You could implement or update assessments that may already be in place. You can develop, update goals or strategies for a region. You can identify or even implement zoning or coding changes that need to happen to make your tech hub a success. You can develop plans that focus on broad economic growth or develop workforce plans. There's a whole set of additional requirements, though, if you want to use the funds for workforce. We didn't specify them here, but they, again, are in the statute. So some of the award details here, there's a $50 million authorization level for the strategy grants. EDA is directed in the statute to make at least 60 awards. At least a third of those have to go to small and rural areas, again, with the same definition as before. At least a third need to go to consortia that include an EPSCoR state. And then the federal share is 80% on these, with the exception of 90% for ones that predominantly serve rural areas and 100% for tribal governments. All right, so I mentioned this term, a consortia, several times. So who are the consortia? What you need to have? So each eligible consortia must include one or more of each of those 4 bullet points. So you must have an institution of higher education. And again, the designation encourages consortia to include minority serving institutions. You must have a government, and this can be local, this can be state, this can be territory or tribal government. You must include an industry organization or firms, and they do need to be specific to the tech area in which you are applying to serve. You need to have an organization that is focused in an economic development organization that is actually focused on supporting entrepreneurship, innovation, or providing risk capital. From the definition of the statute, it doesn't appear that a general economic development group that focuses just on recruitment or retention would necessarily meet the needs on the must-have list. And then you also need to have a representative from a labor organization or from a workforce development organization. Beyond that, there are a lot of other groups that can participate in an eligible consortia. Those can include economic development organization, community development organization, venture development organization, an organization that supports STEM diversity, K through 12 schools, federal national labs, manufacturing extension partnership center, a manufacturing USA center, a transportation focused organization, such as a planning org or a transit organization, cooperative extensions, or actually regional innovation engines are allowed to sit on this as well if they don't already fall into one of the other categories. So I mentioned earlier that just in the last 24 hours, EDA has started taking some action. So first, I want to flag for people that there was a request for information published in the Federal Register on the Tech Hubs program that was officially published this morning. Comments are due March 16th. There's an opportunity to talk about any or all elements of the program, including Tech Hubs characteristics, program design, and program administration. The actual listing in the Federal Register includes specific questions within each of those areas. And then, as with, in general, any RFI, but specifically mentioned on EDA's site, you are also encouraged to provide feedback on other elements that don't necessarily fit into one of the questions that they've specifically asked you to respond to. And then for follow-up resources, EDA has created a page for the Tech Hubs. This includes a link back to the statute. It includes a one-page fact sheet on what the program is, as well as an FAQ on the program. I will also let you know, I did not see a separate sign up for the Tech Hubs program on this new page, but the CHIPS office that Commerce set up under NIST has mentioned Tech Hubs updates in its emails in the past. So if you want to get news alerts from EDA, that's one place that you could sign up to get more information. And then you also have my contact information there, and happy to try to follow up questions beyond what you have on this call right now.
Hey,
so yeah,
Jason,
go ahead, Dan.
Jason, would you go back one slide to the RFI? So I want to call this out specifically for a lot of good questions that people have posed in the chat about their experience with the Build Back Better Regional Challenge, that observations that you have on what would make the Tech Hubs program work better, whether it's dealing with K through 12, whether it's the structure of the program. The RFI is really designed to capture those kinds of things. So I encourage you to submit your thoughts on what would really make the Tech Hubs a strong program. So just wanted to sneak that in before you called for an end to the recording and open Q&A, assuming that's where you were heading next.
Yeah, that would be, unless there were any other clarifications that you thought you'd want to get on the record here.
No, I think Zach's question is a great question. It's probably one let's handle in the Q&A.
Good. All right, then, Susan, if you want to please go ahead and stop the recording.